Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And in this one, we're going to be doing a quick little peek at the Subtlety Rogue because it's not often that you get to really have a good look at them. They're either in stealth or you're probably already dead. Notorious for their burst damage in PvP and their elusiveness as a class, the Rogue. What's going to be going on for you in Shadowlands, you may be wondering. So a lot of abilities are going baseline. For all of the rogue specs. In particular, you're going to notice that your Nightblade dot is gone, and it's going back to being Rupture. So just a little bit of a cosmetic change there. You're going to lose out on the benefits that were applied to Nightblade, such as reduced healing effects and a slow. So you're going to be losing that. But you gain it back by getting your poisons baseline, which we should be able to get wound poison as well as soon as the trainer has it available, I would imagine, when it launches. So you're going to be going back to poisons very similarly to assassination. And you do get the synergies with them from your honor talents, not so much from your normal talents. They're more or less just kind of there. I suppose with a Shiv being baseline to both specs, you could gain some potential, but Shiv is also not nearly as effective as it is for assassination. It's generally just focused as a movement impairing effect, not so much a toxic blade damage enhancing effect. So the poisons are more or less there in PvP, at least to reduce healing, to apply a slow to multiple targets, and that's going to be the main usage for the poisons in general. We still have blind evasion, and we now have slice and dice also returning to the Subtlety Rogue. So once again, combo point management going to be increasing. This may come as an annoyance for you if your main enjoyment of the game is Mythic Plus. To me, generally speaking, for Mythic Plus players, we just like to get to the top of the damage meter as quickly as possible and ramp up immediately. So having slice and dice be something in the order of achievement to that maximum AoE potential can be perceived as an annoyance. But for me personally, I like ramping up and making it so it matters if you ramp up correctly. When you hit that high point, you get a really good high point, and there's the ability to outplay somebody by having some ramp or some combo point management. So for me, I really like to see slice and dice coming back to the rogue in general, and obviously for subtlety as well. When we look at the normal talents, you'll notice that find weakness is now baseline, and that is super powerful in PvP. This is an ability that has made Subtlety Rogue really strong in the past, and now you don't have to pick it in contestant with the other talents, which a new one is still waiting to come through. There's still a lot on that isn't available. There's no conduits yet for Subtlety Rogue. The legendaries are also mostly in construction. However, the legendaries that have been created are insane. When I get to them here, they're very insane. When I was just trying them out in the beta, when other people were using them against me, Subtlety Rogue, at least in PvP, is bonkers. If marksmanship hunters stay as powerful as they are in terms of their damage output, if mages are still competitive, I could see Subtlety Rogue taking the throne again from assassination in terms of being the best PvP rogue spec. Now, in dungeons, it's obviously been a whole story of outlaw, right? And that's mostly from Blade Flurry. But Blade Flurry is also being limited now. Instead of it being all targets around you, it's being limited down to 4 targets. So if you're an outlaw rogue, again, and you're a Mythic Plus player, this probably upsets you because you're not going to be able to pull as big. Your damage isn't immediately going to be as high. But this change makes it so other specializations can have a shot. So Subtlety Rogue with the Shuriken Storm, maybe going like Secret Technique, will actually have a chance of competing on trash pulls. And it really depends on how they decide to go about tuning the dungeons. If they want you only pulling 4 to 5 mobs at a time, utilizing crowd control more, and less of the pull everything, stun it, gun it down immediately in 2 seconds. If it's not stun everything, gun it down in 2 seconds, then Subtlety Rogue could have some real opportunity here with the crowd control that it brings with Shadow Dance, stun locks, saps, blinds, and potentially good AoE, depending on the build that you decide to go with. So Subtlety could be resurrected in general, really, for the game. not just taking the throne back in PvP, but potentially in PvE. Of course, tuning is still going to have to be done, and it's still going to be determined by what they want to do in terms of dungeon trash design and how they're going to intend for players to be able to pull the dungeons and the way they tune their spells. But right now, Subtlety looks like it could be coming back strong in both PvP and PvE at the moment. It still more or less plays the same as the Battle for Azeroth rogue, so you're not going to feel too awkward. It's just getting enhanced, basically. I was wondering, at the moment we aren't able to access the Night Fae as a covenant, but their Sepsis ability, which is basically a dot, and if it, the way that it's explained, if it comes out like this, is if the target doesn't die with the dot, which is, I mean, in PvP, if they die, you win, and then if they don't die, you vanish, basically, and it becomes a 30-second cooldown. So you've got an extra vanish every 30 seconds, which means you're going to have access to Shadow Strike way more. And now we get to the good part. The legendary that I was trying. So if as soon as this becomes available, I'm immediately buying it because there's no way it's not absolutely crazy. There's a legendary at the moment where while stealth is active, which Shadow Dance is included, and for 5 seconds after breaking stealth, your critical strike chance is increased by 100%. So if Sepsis puts you in stealth every 30 seconds, you getting a ton of damage. You got 2 charges of Shadow Dance, you getting a ton of damage. You want to go and spec into reduced cooldown vanish, you getting a lot of damage. I mean, crit is normally not a great stat, but when you have 100% crit and you can mash out your hardest hitting attack with Shadow Strike and Eviscerates, you're gonna get a lot of damage. I mean, and that's the main thing that Subtlety needs to be strong, right? You're focused on bursting targets down in a stun. I more or less was killing people in cheap shots and kidney shots at the moment, even without access to all the other stuff that I was talking about. But then you add in things like Shadowy Duel or Smoke Bomb or Blind setups. Also take into account on the beta, it's varying levels of skill. A lot of people don't even have a PvP trinket because they've removed the Gladiator Medallion as an option. Now, I'm assuming it's going back to being a normal trinket that you have to buy, but it's still not on the vendor. So a lot of people haven't figured out that you can go to the heirloom vendor and buy an old version of that trinket and use it. So you stun someone and then they don't trinket and they die. But even still, if you have to trinket the first stun of a game every time, that's still pretty scary. I was running a Night Stalker build as opposed to a Subterfuge build because you get access to stealth so frequently, and I was thinking that just doing 12% more damage, going Weapon Master, having a chance to hit them twice for 100% crit. I was thinking about just trying to build this all in, almost kind of just cheesy crit bursty build, and also running the Cold Blood just to try and add in a ton of damage, and then running Vigor for energy regen just to get more Shadow Strikes out, as opposed to the Mark for Death for Eviscerate burst. At the moment, Subtlety Rogue is a lot of fun, and depending on where its sustained damage ends up lying is usually where its weakness is determined. If the game is all about just surviving and extending a fight, then Subtlety Rogue struggles. Subtlety Rogue is all about setup, getting crowd control, and getting burst out. So it really depends on tuning as to whether or not Subtlety Rogue is going to be a competitive option, as I think it is still likely that Assassination is going to be doing more consistent pressure than it. At the moment, still Serrated Bone Spike is the best, it seems like, for any rogue spec, and I think it's true in PvE and PvP. To me, I feel like there's no way this ability doesn't get reduced in some capacity, and then the other covenants can become an option. The things that you are likely going to have to be worried about with Subtlety Rogue is covenant abilities and passives. So things like the Fleshcraft, I was really loud. Things like the Fleshcraft Shield with the talented Soulbind to make you immune to crowd control. This is going to be game changing in a sense. I'm still not 100% sold on whether or not it's good or bad for the game. Because in one way, when I'm playing the games where if everyone's a Necrolord, you have to play it really differently. Because usually at the start of a game, you just want to go, get that. All right, stun the healer, trap the healer. All right, stun the healer, kill the healer. We're going. But with this, it's like, hey, you gotta feel out the game for a couple of seconds, then decide based on where everybody is what you want to do, it makes it a little bit more impromptu, as opposed to just like, we have this plan, always stun this person, always do this to this person because you can. Whereas with this, you can't. So I'm still in a weird place as to whether or not this is an ability that ruins PvP. How can they make people immune to CC? Or if I'm on the side of the fence, like, hey, it actually changes the game in a way that you have to play it and be more creative in a sense, as opposed to just always following the same plan. So I'm still somewhat on the fence. But regardless, with how it has to do in regards to Rogue is, you don't get to stun everything you want to, you don't get to do everything you immediately want to do in a game. Until you break off these shields, and these shields are 20% of the player's health. And if all 3 enemy players are doing that, you got to go between all of them, get that shield off, and then start to look for crowd control. And that is going to slow down Subtlety Rogue's potential, because you're going to have to use a lot of energy. You potentially have to use some cooldowns even to try and cut through those shields before you can initiate with crowd control. Other things like the chomps from Venthyr, or not Venthyr, from Kyrian, that where when a player is standing still for 5 seconds, then stuns are reduced by 30%. That could be devastating. Things like the Sephu's legendary that reduces crowd control by 25%, depending on how they want to tune that, with other things like hardiness from orcs, where they also get stun reduction, if those are going to be multiplicative or additive. I'm not a mathematician there. That's still a huge amount of stun reduction, right? If you're an orc, Kyrian, Sephu's rogue, 30, 25. What is hardiness now? Is it still 25? It's 20. So 30, 20, 25% stun reduction. And if they all work together, you won't ever be able to stun anything. That's really bad for sub. But generally speaking, is everybody going to want to go for that build? Possibly, if rogues do the most damage. If rogues continue to do as much damage as they're doing, then that might be, if you're a PvP player and you're competitive on the ladder, then you will likely go for the Kyrian, be an orc, or even be a human, and then get out of every stun as well with an extra way to remove it. So basically, the dangers to Subtlety Rogue's potential in this expansion more or less reside in all of these crowd control reductions that they're adding onto tons of places in the game that are going to all stack together, I would imagine. That is generally what could hold them back in PvP. In PvE, it really depends on how much they're going to go in and kind of rip out that old way of playing dungeons. Are they going to limit the cleave from a lot of specs, like Demon Hunter's I-Beam hits everything, immediate damage. No one else can keep up with them because their ramp is just immediate. And then same thing for with Outlaw Rogues with the Blade Flurry, right? So in a way, in my opinion, and maybe my opinion shouldn't count because I'm not like a competitive Mythic Plus player, but when I PvE, I would like to maybe interact more with the trash pulls than just run in there, stun everything, and AoE it down. And if you're playing a class that isn't capable of that, you don't even get invited to a plus 10 or 15. You can't even get your weekly done because you don't fit in that niche, and that's the only niche that's available for Mythic Plus. I think bringing in some other niches like crowd control or burst damage or some ramp classes like some dot classes is a good move. Even if it was just specialized into specific dungeons, like one dungeon is a great dungeon for damage over time ramp classes, and other dungeons are still really good for the I-Beam and the cleave down, or maybe a certain part of the dungeon is good for ramp and a certain part of the dungeon is good for immediate cleave, and then you want to split your group composition up a bit. Because to me, when I'm watching a lot of competitive Mythic Plus, it's always the same classes over and over, and it's usually a trend who can do the most immediate AoE damage to as many targets as possible. So by bringing that down, and again, this is just my opinion, outside perspective opinion, and you can take it if you want to make it count or not count, but interacting with the mobs, interrupting them, crowd controlling them, to me adds more interesting gameplay and leaves more potential to get different classes into dungeons. So if that's the route that they decide to go for, Subtlety could have a niche with that, and I'm excited to see how it plays out, because right now it's a lot of fun. It's at least in PvP, it's doing really good damage. There's quite a lot of like little nuance you can do now. Well, I say nuance. It's you just kill them instantly with the 100% crit chance ring. So it's maybe just a little bit cheesy. I would think that it gets nerfed to some degree, but it still has potential. I'm interested to see how it plays out, and I'll keep my eyes on it for those of you that are interested in the Subtlety Rogue, as we're still pretty early on in the beta stages for Shadowlands. So thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a like and comment down below if you think that I've missed something or you want me to look into something further. Obviously, when the conduits and the legendaries start becoming more available, I'm pumping out content here on the channel. So subscribe if you're interested in knowing everything about Shadowlands. And that's my main goal, is to just be a resource for all of us so that we can make the right choice when it comes to our gameplay, because Shadowlands has a lot of choices and we don't need any more stress about which one's going to be the right one. So thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video.